I've gotten older, health and wellness has definitely become one of my top priorities as a younger athlete and coach. I think you're just burning the candle at both ends, just going and going and going, and think you can make it work that way. And as you get older, you can see, energy levels, you can see emotional control, you can see all these things get affected when you're not maximizing your proper health, your proper sleep, your proper diet, the supplements that you need to get your levels correct. So as I've gotten older, I wish I would have discovered it at a younger age. But as I've gotten older, it's definitely become one of the top priorities of my life.
I know your philosophy in the past has been, sleep's tough, right? That's one of those things where there's only so much you can do, especially if your job's demanding and things like that. And I know you've used getting up ultra early as kind of a weapon almost, so like, how do you balance that? I mean, essentially, maybe it's what you just said, right? Like it's become more important now, whereas when you were younger, you could get away with it.
No doubt. When I first got in the profession, of coaching, waking up early, spending the night in the office is kind of a badge of honor. And that's just what you do. It's how you're taught. You just believe that that's how you're going to be successful. But as you get older, you realize that can actually be detrimental in a lot of ways. When you're getting 2 or 3 hours of sleep, you're showing up, you're cranky, you're just not yourself. You don't have the energy levels. You're not processing like you would with better sleep. And so that's another deal that I think you may not always get 8, 9 hours, but being consistent in what you get, I think is key, and having a routine that you stick by it and you're not willing to compromise on that aspect, I think is a big deal.
You're probably one of the most routine oriented, self disciplined guys I've ever met. And I don't know. I mean, where does that come from? What is it? What are some tricks maybe even that you've used along the way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just, the people I've known throughout my life that have been successful have had insane self-discipline and insane consistency in schedule, and have woken up early, to be honest. And so that was a deal that I knew when I transitioned into coaching. I wanted to move up quickly, and I knew the way to do it would be to outwork people basically. So I wanted to develop a consistent routine in a pretty chaotic profession at times, with the in-season schedule you have, the recruiting if you're in college on the roads. I mean, it's hard to do if you're not very focused and very intentional about what you do. So that was just a deal coming from being a pro athlete where I knew I hadn't maximized what I could be and didn't have those type of regimented programs in place. I wanted to make sure in this next phase that I was dialed in, and there'd be no excuses if I wasn't able to get where I wanted to get.
Yeah. So, I mean, before you kind of dug deeper into, getting lab work done and looking at hormones and nutritional deficiencies and things like that, I mean, I'm sure you probably relied on all sorts of different little, energy boosts or mood boosts or like whatever. I mean, how has that shifted? From kind of using more artificial sources for energy and attention and focus to more like establishing a better foundation so that that can be a more natural source.
Yeah, I think just with age, as I realized that I needed to change up some of those things in my programming, if you will. Yeah, I used to be energy drinks and coffee all day long, and whatever it took just to keep that boost and keep you rolling. And so at some point you realize there's going to be a letdown if you just boosting artificially like that. And that would come, and you wouldn't be at your best, whether it's in front of the team or at practice or game planning, when you needed to be. And so I figured out that you could get those same states by just supplementing your diet, your supplements, your exercise, your sleep, and programming it where you don't have those lapses during the day where you feel tired. You don't have an inconsistent sleep schedule, and it allows you to feel, at your best throughout the day.
I know you take supplements. I know you have your kind of Vitality RX that you take every day. What do you know about why that's important?
Ever since I started getting my blood done with Vitality and getting the levels where they needed to be in certain areas, it's been a game changer for me. And I just, to be able to maximize who you are professionally, personally, in your relationships, I just think it's key as you get older to make sure those things are all lined up.
Yeah, I don't think people realize. I mean, obviously, you hear all the time about the impact of diet, right? But I don't think people make the correlation, interestingly enough, between diet and supplementation and understand that a supplement is called a supplement because it's there to supplement your diet, right? It's like the whole point is, yeah, of course, if you ate perfectly, you could get all the nutrients you needed from food, but no one eats perfectly, right? So there's deficiencies that are created over time from gaps in your diet that you can fill in with supplementation. The other I think misconception is that on the one side, it's that vitamins, don't work and it's just like expensive pee that you're paying for. And then the other side, it's that people don't understand that the whole point is not to just take it like you're taking a medication and it's going to cause some very specific reaction. It's more like supporting the system so it has the fuel, right? Like your body is made up of all of these complex sequences of protein synthesis and chain reactions and all those kind of things. And if there are pieces of the chain that are broken or not working as efficiently, then your whole body just doesn't work as efficiently. So um, it's always an interesting conversation around kind of explaining why that matters and why it works and all that kind of stuff.
This has become more mainstream. I mean, you see some of the most successful people in the world transforming their bodies and their lifestyles. And, when the best people and most successful people in their professions are doing it, it's usually a pretty good idea to jump on board and kind of follow, some of the elite minds in the world.
I think the whole biohacking thing has gotten really big, and there's some really big guys, or really guys with really big platforms, kind of jumping in and saying how doing this, that, and the other has kind of changed the game. It's interesting because the way I see biohacking, or these a lot of these kind of things is to get you from maybe 90% to 100 or 85 to 100. And I think like people don't realize that there's some really boring foundational components to health, like like you already kind of mentioned, around diet and sleep and movement and exercise and stress management and things like that. And it's really important to kind of do those things so that your hormones are balanced and so that your system is just kind of firing on all cylinders. And I think there's misconceptions around not just how important it is to have your hormone levels dialed in and optimal, but what that actually does for you, right? And it by no means is it a silver bullet that solves all your problems, but it's such a foundational component of your health. That's kind of like the gas that's in the tank that powers makes the car go, right? And you got a Ferrari and you're putting unleaded gas in it, it's just not going to run as well. I think is a good analogy. Um, what are some of the kind of one or some of the most impactful things you think you've done that you believe have kind of contributed to your success, whether that be spiritually, whether it be health wise, whether it be habit wise, whatever. I mean, what are one or two things that you can point to and say, like, I really think that made a difference and moved the needle?
Yeah, I think just the commitment to consistency and routine in season for me. We talked about it, but being able to just say, all right, here's 7 months and this is what it's going to be. And it's going to be basically like 7 months of training camp where you're waking up at the same time every day. You're eating at the same time. You have your offensive game planning at the same time. You have your stat meeting at the same time. Just an incredible routine that allows you to, function at your highest level, optimize your hours in the day, and just really maximize yourself each and every day. I think I was able to establish that early and saw how that allowed me to kind of come up in the profession quickly, that I was willing to make those sacrifices. And that's something I've stuck to through the years.
Yeah, I think that's really easy to say, but there's most people it's really hard to actually do, right? Like there's so many other things that are out there in terms of distractions and priorities and all that kind of stuff. And I think the ability to block all that stuff out, is a master skill. Undeniably, all of us would perform better when the pins are all lined up for us and our job is just to go knock them down, right? And so, but what happens is I think you get into a space where all this other stuff is going on and you're the one that's responsible for setting up the pins for yourself and then also knocking them down. And so I think by having that routine locked in and all those pins, so to speak, kind of lined up for you, then it just simplifies everything and it boils it all down to it's just at that point, it's just execution. It's about having a plan.
I've always found it gave me a mental edge. Like waking up this hour, I felt like, hey, that's going to get me over the top. Getting the proper supplements, that's going to get me over the top. Working out every day, that's going to get me over the top. However, I could do it to give me a mental edge of nothing else, just thinking I'm maximizing who I am as a person and a professional. That I think is a lot of the secret sauce, because if you believe it, whatever you're doing, consistently believe it and do it at a high level, you're going to make improvements.
Okay, so back to kind of health and taking care of yourself and recovery.
Yeah, I think that's a great separator in that league still. The guys that have really adapted to the, self-improvement stuff, health improvement, health and wellness, are the guys that are playing the 12, 13, 14, being in the Hall of Fame. I mean, the Hall of Famers I was around, it was an all day, everyday process, in season, out of season, taking care of their bodies, making sure they were properly fed and hydrated, and had chefs and had the blood work done and had their own trainers. I mean, that to me is what separates in that league the great from the good. And, the saying in the league is availability is your greatest ability. And that's what you see, is those guys are able to perform at a higher level week in and week out, and not be on the sideline and not be in the training room as much, because they take care of their bodies. They're very intentional, very focused with it. They pay the money, which it's expensive to have all those things, but you're a pro athlete, and that's your number one thing, is to be available in that field. So it's come a long way. I would point to guys in the locker room, like, listen, if you want to play 12, 13, 14 years, there's guys that are showing you the blueprint. Like, they have the answers to the test. So I think as these years go by, more and more young people are going to get into that. And with professional athletes, to me, it's such a game changer when you're talking about, I want to be a pro, or I want to be a great pro. And you see that each and every day with the way guys take care of their bodies, and the ones that have the longest careers.
That's the biggest message we're trying to get across, right? And it goes back to what we were talking about, finding artificial sources of energy and focus and things like that. That's great. It can give you a boost, but longevity wise, is that what's going to be able to sustain you? Like, what goes up must come down. There's peaks and valleys and troughs. And it's like, is that the greatest long-term solution? And I think, like, some guys think, whatever, I'll worry about it later. And then other guys are kind of willing to see that if they can be proactive about it now, and preventative, then they can get to a spot where they're just much more of a well-oiled machine. And that can make a huge difference. And then maybe you need less coffee, and maybe you need less pre-workout, and you can kind of space that stuff out. And maybe that makes you a little bit healthier, a little bit less reliant on those kind of things, and so on and so forth.
A lot of people in general, I think they focus on, being shredded or just being fit. To me, it's so much about mental clarity and emotional control, and be able to handle those situations, high stress situations, each and every day. It's a profound difference when I would not get the amount of sleep, not be on the right supplements, be eating shitty, and how I would act towards people, and how I, was cloudy trying to develop game plans, or speak in front of the team, as opposed to when I was dialed in. All those things are aligned. So I think that's such a big piece of it, that people just want to think about the fitness and being able to run 3 miles and be shredded. To me, the other part, the mental health and your emotional control and your focus, are just as equal, are just as big a part of that as anything.
The mental health component of this is really interesting, because number one, your hormones can be used as a biomarker to diagnose depression, which is interesting. These hormones are neurochemicals. They're produced in your brain, right? They control a lot of different functions physically and mentally. And people don't really realize not just the importance of that on a physiological level, but think about the times where you lash out, or you end up being an asshole, or saying something that you didn't mean to say, or doing something you didn't mean to do. Is it likely that you were tired? Right? When you did that, like that, it shortens your fuse, right? You kind of feel like shit. You're kind of tired, and things piss you off a lot more. And that people don't really realize that, right? If you're like in that agitated state and you haven't gotten proper rest, or because your hormones are imbalanced, you're just really low energy and tired, like that's going to make a big difference, like much more than I think people really realize.
If you truly want to maximize, all aspects of your life, and be the best version of yourself you can be every day, I mean, that's a big part of it, being able to handle stressful situations and deal with family and deal with coworkers and all the things that come out through today. I think that's such a huge part of it that kind of gets lost in a lot of these discussions.
Yeah, I mean, you could make the argument that it's everything, to be
Hmm.
honest. I mean, what's more important than having enough energy? I mean, you're just in a better mood when you do. Things bother you less. Stuff's kind of rolling off your back, and yeah.
Yeah, as far as TRT goes, I know we've talked about it in the past, but what are your thoughts? You hear different stories from different sides of it, whether it's good for you or it has these adverse effects, like where you sit with your company. Like, give me your breakdown on TRT.
Personally, I believe that it's a good tool that should be in the tool belt, but I do think it's overprescribed, and I do think people are turning to it too early, and I do think it's kind of being pushed down people's throats where it shouldn't be at this point, right? Just because of our diet and our lifestyle and the environment that we're in, our hormones are getting crushed, right? Like they're dropping at historic rates. So most everybody has some kind of issue, for one reason or another with hormones being imbalanced. Now, supplementing testosterone, if your testosterone is low, supplementing with testosterone using testosterone replacement therapy, essentially your body is being convinced that it already has enough testosterone and it doesn't need to create anymore. So that's okay if you're really deficient and nothing else works. But you're gonna, if you shut down your own production, you're going to be dependent on it from there on out, right? And then another big thing that people don't realize is that if you're shutting down your testosterone production, you're also shutting down your sperm production. So your fertility, which also is being affected negatively by your diet and lifestyle and environment, that's already being hammered the same way your testosterone levels are. You're even further pushing that number down. So I think it's just shouldn't ever be a first line of defense. And I think even one step before that, anytime somebody asks me about kind of the solution or the treatment, I love talking about this really interesting way to kind of reboot and rebalance your hormone levels naturally. But the first thing is, how do you even know what's going on, right? Like without diagnostics, without some labs, and without knowing if your testosterone levels are low or your estrogen levels are high, or, you have some other issue going on with your prostate or something like that, how do you know? So I think that's the biggest thing that we've been able to do is make that piece or that part of the process super easy and efficient so that guys that normally wouldn't jump through those hoops and make that kind of effort, or normally don't have time to do it, can do that, really can take care of that piece really easily. And then from there, not only do you have a tool that you can use to tailor your approach, but you've also kind of set a benchmark for yourself. Even though these numbers are really important, it's also just as important to not treat the numbers, right? You have to look at the whole picture of like, how do you feel at these numbers? And then if you have that and you've established a benchmark or a baseline for yourself, then you can compare yourself against yourself, and that's another interesting thing. I got asked the other day, like, well, is that normal? Are my levels normal? Like what's normal, right? 88% of the US is metabolically unhealthy. So is that normal? Do you want to be normal? I don't know. I think it's just about how do you feel personally? And how can we use these numbers and match that to how you feel and see, okay, if you feel this way and your numbers are here, how do you feel when your numbers are here? Right? Or how do you feel when your numbers are here? Whatever it is, when we're balancing ratios of testosterone and estrogen or things like that.
Yeah, and to that point, like the TRT skeptics, some of their arguments, um, how do you kind of talk your clients through that when they have those? I've heard it does this or does that. How do you, in your personal experience, I mean, have you seen adverse effects from, the TRT?
I think there's a way to do TRT where you can not shut down your natural production. You can kind of go back and forth between TRT and maybe rebooting and rebalancing natural production. But I think that doesn't happen typically in a typical TRT type program. So like I said, and then there's also different considerations. Maybe you're in your 60s and you don't want to have kids, and so fertility is not an issue. That's out the door. Maybe you're perfectly comfortable with doing injections once or twice a week from here on out. Like
Mhm.
that's so that's not a consideration. So maybe you're perfectly comfortable with donating blood once or twice a month, so your blood doesn't get too thick, and so there's no cardiovascular risk really. So, like I said, I mean, there's definitely use cases where um, it can be good and it can be effective if managed properly. I just think that most programs are not managing it properly, and so that's
Yeah.
where the risk that just
Just
like
just like
everything else.
anything else, right? Anything else, do it the right way, it's going to work. If you don't, you could have issues.
Totally. And I think that's the big thing about this program that we built is because it's the perfect balance between something that's super effective and something that's easy to stay consistent and compliant with. That's the really, like, talking about the vitamins in particular. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had about the vitamins. Somebody that's used to taking supplements, and they have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 supplement bottles, in their cupboard or sitting on their counter or whatever. They'll get real gung ho about it. It's the beginning of the year or something like that. New year, new you. You're finding a new motivation around this stuff. I'm going to get healthy, and you start taking these vitamins, and then inevitably after a week or two, you kind of fall off, and then you get real inconsistent. And that's a big factor with vitamins because it's just a very kind of slow, consistent thing that really creates the most impact. So just by making it easy and having just one pack that has your 5 or 6 vitamins in it, and you just grab that pack, open it, and that's it. It just makes it a million times easier. So it's where's that intersection of the most impact and the
Can be,
easiest, uh,
yeah.
convenient, yeah, most convenient method that can allow you to really stick to something. And we already talked about kind of the importance of establishing the habits and consistency, and how that can just kind of impact your whole life, honestly.
I think supplementation and health and wellness as you get older is how many people don't understand that maybe they are depressed, or maybe their metabolism is lower and they're gaining weight, or maybe they're tired at work every day, simply because the levels or something is off that's so easily fixable. So you can basically reinvent yourself with just a tweak here or there by getting your blood tested and figuring out what's off and what's missing, instead of just accepting it. Like, I'm getting older, I'm feeling tired, my skin doesn't look as good, my body doesn't look as good. Once people realize that there's actually things you can do and you go down that path, it's just amazing how you can become the person you wanted to be at any age. I truly believe that. There's stories over and over and over of people tweaking one thing, and it's a game changer, and they're reinvigorated for life and their relationships and their profession. And so I think that's the coolest part of this entire health and wellness, journey that I've been on, is just knowing what it's done for me, being able to operate at a high level into my 40s, and just hearing the stories of other people as well that have just been able to do the supplements, do the blood tests, do different things that have really transformed their entire lives. Even when everybody's like, you're over the hill, you're 40, this, that, and the other, you still got a long way to go, and you can maximize that and really become whatever type of person you want to become.